Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and most welcome to this seminar in the celebration of Executive Education 50 years. I'm really happy that so many of you have signed up for this webinar, and I'm really thrilled to spend these 45 minutes together with you. And together with me in the studio, I have David, who is the technical genius and will take care of all the questions and so on that you might have. So let me start. The next slide, please. Great, thank you. So before we start, just a few words on how to make this webinar work well. So first of all, we would really like to have this as an interactive webinar. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them with me. And you can do this by two ways. First of all, you can sort of raise your hand. There's a specific function for that. And then David will unmute you because now you're all muted by default. Or you can write a question in the chat, and David will also let me know that you have a question. So again, please feel free to engage and have an interactive seminar or webinar together. Great, so next slide, please. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Frida Pemer. I'm a researcher here at the Stockholm School of Economics. My title in Swedish is docent, and in English is assistant professor. And I'm working at the Department of Management and Organization, and also the newly founded and super exciting House of Innovation. And in doing that, I'm focusing my research mostly on digital transformation, specifically on knowledge-intensive companies, such as professional service firms, of course. And I also do a lot of teaching here at Executive Education, directed at digital transformation, and also at master level here at Stockholm School of Economics. And today I'm going to present some smoking hot new findings from a research project that I'm leading. So we can have the next slide, please. Great. So I'm leading a research project that's 3 years old. Sorry, it's going to run for 3 years. And it's an international research project that I'm running together with Professor Thale Kjølsvik in Oslo, Norway, Professor Andreas Werg here at the Stockholm School of Economics, and Dr. Love Börjesson from Stanford University. And we're interested in what's happening with the digital experts when digital technologies can become more and more used in organizations and in everyday life. So previously, we thought that experts were going to be shielded from automation and AI because their knowledge is so very specific, and especially when it comes to professional services, it's very much building on having a close dyadic relationship with the client. And it's very much building on the social skills of the humans. But today we can see that even these types of services are becoming increasingly replaced by technology. So then the question is, what happens with the expert? And as you can see on the slide, we are looking at both the traditional companies, the incumbent firms offering expert services, professional service firms, but then also smaller companies, tech-based professional service firms. And the question that we illustrate here is that, well, there used to be humans everywhere almost in these expert roles, but now we can see an increasing trend towards replacing them with technology. So the question is, what's happening with the lawyers, what's happening with the auditors and so on in the future? And today I'm going to report on the findings from a study that we made on incumbent traditional professional service firms that have been really, really successful for a long time, but now have to change, perhaps, because digitalization is happening. Okay, so next slide, please. But before we do that, I would just like to have an idea of what kind of sector you are working in. So if you could please respond to the question that you have here to see if you're working in the private sector or in the public sector. Okay, so now we have the results, and we can see that overwhelming majorities work in the private sector. But we also have some respondents working in the public sector. I'm really happy to have you here as well. So the findings that I'm going to report on today, well, it's based on a study performed in the private sector, but the companies, the consultants, the auditors, the lawyers that we have studied are offering their services to a large extent to the public sector. So these two sectors are really sort of intertwined in many ways, and they're also facing different kinds of challenges when it comes to digitalization. And I think there's a lot to learn from each sector to each other as well. Great, so thank you for sharing that. Could I have next slide, please? Right. So the title for this webinar has to do with managing disruption in professional service firms. But what is really disruption? What is it? What's it meant by that? And we know that today it's really a buzzword. We can see the word disruption almost anywhere, in consulting reports, in media, in TV, and so on. And the thing is that a lot of people would associate disruption with like a specific event or a specific technology, seeing it almost like a bomb that is detonating and changing everything in an industry. But that's not really the case. And it might actually be more helpful to think about disruption as a process. And this process can be quite slow. And sometimes it's even difficult to see that it is happening. It happens very gradually, incrementally. And for many incumbent firms, this is the reason why they do not detect the changes until it's a bit too late. And as you can see on the slide here, there are many things to be said about disruption, but to pick out a few, we could say that it's normally driven by technological advancements. Something is happening in the technology frontier that enables people to do business in a different way. And that is very often picked up by entrepreneurial people who start a new firm, perhaps, or a new division, and start offering new tech-based services, or perhaps turning non-customers into customers, changing the market dynamics, etc. And a reason that I would really like to stress here that why incumbent firms do not always pick up these trends early on is that many of these startups, they direct their businesses towards the low-end segment of a market that the incumbents are not really serving. Because usually the incumbent firms want to position themselves as being strategic, offering high-value services to the high-end section of the market. And they do not care that much about the low-end section. So there the new entrants can enter and start to provide services and also start to provide new ways of offering services, changing customer expectations and so on, and climbing the value chain. And all of a sudden they're up there competing on the high value end with incumbent firms. So really the key here is to think about disruption as a process, first of all, and to try to keep an eye on what's happening, of course, but then also to remember that how companies respond to digitalization and disruption depends on how well they perceive it and if they perceive it to be a threat or an opportunity. And we're going to look closer on that in just a minute. Next slide, please. Right, but before doing that, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about your industry. So do you think that your industry is on the verge of being disrupted? Is it a big threat or not? And you don't have to give like the correct answer, the perfect answer. This is more about what do you think? What is your feeling about this? And we have a scale here from 1 being very low up to 5 being very high. Okay, so we can see here on the findings that the majority think that their industry has a high or medium threat of disruption. So that's really interesting. Only 9% said there was a low threat of disruption. So is there anyone out there who would like to share reflections on this? If so, you can just raise your hand or write in the chat. But I think we can move on to the next slide while waiting, because I think this is a very, very interesting sort of feeling of the temperature in the industries. So we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, because what we do know is that digitalization is changing all industries, and that everyone is going to be affected by digitalization somehow. The only question is when and how, of course. So it has to do with the pace of disruption or pace of developments in the industries. And this picture is from a global study performed by McKinsey. They made a study of different kinds of industries to see to what extent they have been affected by digitalization. And not very surprisingly, you can see to the right in the figure that the industry that has been most affected by digitalization so far is the media and entertainment industry. And I think most of us understand why. Many of us use Spotify, we use Netflix, etc. for entertainment and so on. And then we have, in the following order, we have retail, also not very surprising. We're shopping online, etc. High tech, we have telecom, healthcare, travel, transportation, and so on. But then professional services is lagging a little bit behind. And this has to do with the characteristics of this industry. Again, as we said before, it is very much people intensive, and it builds on having close relationships between the professionals and the clients and the social skills, etc. But things are changing there as well. And we're going to have a closer look on what is happening inside this industry. So if we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. Yes. So as you can see in this picture, we have as number 4, we have professional services as one category. And that is, of course, fine if you do this global study across lots of different kinds of industries. But we were interested in finding out, okay, so what's happening inside the professional service industry? Because there are different sub-industries inside that category. And perhaps they're not responding in the same way to digitalization. So we've been doing a cross-industry study of auditing firms, law firms, engineering consultants, and PR communication consultants. And we have performed interviews with partners and digital leaders and digital experts in leading incumbent firms. So looking at those firms within these industries that are really, well-established, high-performing, things have been going really well for a long time. So how do they sort of think about digitalization and disruption? That was the question that we asked. Or more specifically, if we can have the next slide, please. We were looking at responses to, how they responded to digitalization by engaging in digital innovation. And now innovation is a very vast concept. It can mean a lot of things, and there's a huge literature on it. But then digital innovation can be explained as having to do with how you use digital tools and technologies to perhaps deliver new types of products or services to clients, or to change your internal ways of working. And to make things really simple here, we use the words service innovation to describe how you can use digital tools to innovate new types of services and service offerings. And then process innovation is more related to, okay, so how can I use digital tools to work in a smarter, perhaps, or better or a new way inside a company? So it has more to do with the internal tools and processes that we're using to deliver services to the client. Right. So if we can next slide, please. Thank you. And we're going to stay with this picture for a while now. So our findings all boil down to this 2x2 matrix. So, if you have a 2x2 matrix, then you're fine. Everything is true. But that's not really the case here. But anyway, we have on the one axis, we have process innovation, and on the other axis, we have service innovation. And we could define 4 strategic responses to digitalization and disruption. And I'm going to describe them to you now. And before doing that, I would like to say that what was really surprising to us in this study was that there was such a big correspondence between what kind of industry people are working in and how they respond to digitalization. Now, it might not sound that surprising, but to us it was, because you could also imagine that it could be small companies responding in a certain way or large companies responding in a different way to digitalization. But in this case, it turned out to be extremely industry specific. So it seems that there are certain industry dynamics that are shaping the way companies respond to digitalization and disruption. And the second thing is that the responses really has to do with how you perceive disruption. Do you think that disruption is happening now? Or do you think that digitalization, it's not really going to disrupt our industry? So let me walk you through this matrix and explain a little bit more the different kinds of strategies that we found. So to start, we have down in the lower left quadrant, we have digitalization as business as usual. And now I just need to say one thing, that normally when you have a 2x2 matrix, it's best to be up in the upper right quadrant. But this is not the case here. This is just 4 different strategies. So starting with digitalization as business as usual, we could find the PR communication consultants here. And I've been presenting the results to them, to many PR communication consultants, and they all agree and say, yes, that is exactly where we are. So in this first response, we can see that they are seeing digitalization not as disruptive. It's not a big threat. Rather, they can use the same kind of traditional services and ways of working as they've done before, also in the future. So, of course, they are experimenting with digital tools and so on, but it's more, to generalize, it's more like an add-on to the existing services. So, for instance, we can see that many of the PR communication consultants are offering services like developing a communication strategy for a client, and they do so, but then they add on communication strategy also for social media. Or they offer media training, again, in all traditional channels, but also how should a CEO be present at Twitter, or should the CEO be present at Twitter at all, for instance. Or it could also be that they are delivering a campaign to reach out to a certain group of citizens or clients. And in doing so, they use the traditional ways of working, but they also add on, for instance, 3D printed products or tools or things in the campaign. So there's still a strong focus on the traditional services, but with some add-ons of digitalization. And the reason for this is, first of all, that what many of them said was that there is not a very strong demand among the clients for more advanced digital solutions yet. It might come, but we're not there yet. And there's also not that many tools that actually could perform the work that the PR communication consultants are doing instead of humans. And this has to do with the strong relationship building part of their work, but also the language part and the ability to really communicate, to have an empathic kind of intelligence and really communicate, understand what the client needs and so on. So that is quite interesting that they are not feeling that it's being disrupted in any sense. We can also see that this is reflected inside when it comes to process innovation. They reflect inside the companies that they still have the same kind of partnership structure. And they also have the traditional performance management systems. So some of the digital experts that I've been talking to said that, well, that is all fine, but what I am doing is not really seen or rewarded by the promotion systems and so on. So it's not a lot of explicit value being placed on digital skills in the PR communication consulting firms. Now, things are, of course, happening there as well, and there are firms that are trying to experiment and work more with digital innovation and so on. But in general, we would say that most of the PR communication consultants are using this strategy, business as usual. Okay, so could I have the next one, please? Thank you. Right, so the second strategy that we could find is called digitalization as a business opportunity. And this strategy was found mostly among the engineering consultants that we interviewed. And this is not that surprising, perhaps, because to them, digitalization or technology is not really new. That is what they are doing for a living. So many of them said that, well, this hype that we can see in media, for instance, self-driving cars and so on, that's not really new for us. We have been using self-driving vehicles in mines for like decades. So it's more business as usual in that sense, but also business opportunities because they can see that their clients are lagging behind when it comes to digital expertise. And they as engineers have a very good position to learn these new digital technologies and help their clients. So in these firms, we could see a lot of initiatives going on at the very local level. So service innovation was taking place in the interaction between a consultant and a client. And they were coming up with new ideas, new solutions, new tools, new whatever that could be used for the client. However, the lack of process innovation meant that it was difficult for these engineer consultants to scale up these innovations that they had. So could develop a new solution or a new idea, but it was still kept at this very local level and very much specialized for that specific client's needs. And the lack of process innovation was explained by the consultants by this not being very new. Why can't we just use the same old ways of work as we have done before? At the same time, there were some initiatives taking place to start to change a little bit. And this was actually driven by the clients who started to ask the consultants, saying, you're developing new types of services related to digital transformation. You're helping us to transform digitally, but are you taking your own medicine? Are you also changing ways of working? And some of the partners that I spoke to said, well, it's a bit embarrassing to admit, but we're not really there yet. We are still sort of stuck in our old processes. We are going to try to change in the future, but we're not really feeling a strong sense of urgency there. Something else that is quite interesting in this strategy is that it is strong on service innovation, and one of these types of services that is being developed has to do with digital transformation, so helping clients with their transformation journey. And the thing was that this kind of new competencies or roles or services was more lingering towards management and organization skills, which meant that the consultants had to try to get those skills inside the companies and leverage that. We can also see that they got a quite high status internally. So it used to be that you had a really high status if you worked with certain types of projects, but now digital transformation was really the thing that would give you as a consultant a high status, which is quite interesting. Yes, next one, please. Thank you. Yeah, so the third strategy then is called digitalization as a cost driver. And this has two meanings, which I will come back to. And in this quadrant, we can find law firms. And perhaps not very surprisingly, they found that their industry was being disrupted, but perhaps not today and not the next year, but perhaps like in 3 or 5 years' time, it would be disrupted. And this study that I'm reporting on has been performed in Sweden. And the Swedish law firms are saying that, well, we are very aware of what's happening in the UK and the US. We have this huge legal tech market that is really changing the dynamics in the industry. And we can see that there are lots of experiments going on with AI and automation in the legal services industry abroad. However, here in Sweden, we are still somewhat protected for two reasons. First of all, we have the language. I mean, legal services are language-based, and Swedish is a very, very small language. So many of the AI solutions that exist today are trained on English data, English language data. So in Sweden, we also have this different type of legal system, meaning that we don't have as many cases and legal texts as you might have in the UK and the US, for instance. So there's less data to train an AI on, which means that the AI solutions are not as good yet as they need to be implemented and used. And the second aspect of that is that the companies in Sweden, although they might be really, really big in the Swedish market, are not that big in an international comparison. And to invest in AI, well, it takes a lot of resources. So many of the Swedish firms say that, well, we don't have that kind of financial muscles to invest in AI. So we just have to wait. We have to wait until we have perhaps off-the-shelf solutions, or we can actually buy some of the programs and systems that are being developed by Kira and Raven and Luminance and so on. So there is a sort of a time lag with disruption here in Sweden due to the smallness of the market and also the language. But this, of course, is just a matter of time before the AI gets better in Swedish as well. It can be used in practice. Now, there is something else also that is sort of not restricting, but slowing down the pace of disruption in Sweden. And that has to do with legal services being a classic profession that is regulated. So there are very strong professional norms of what you can do and what you can't do as a lawyer, what kind of activities you can engage in, and if you can use AI, how much can you use it and for what purposes, and how will you price that service that the AI has provided. So there are lots of professional norms that are still sort of slowing down the pace of disruption in Sweden. This is both a blessing and a curse, according to the partners that we've been talking to. Right. But I said that the cost driver had two meanings. What did I mean by that? Well, first of all, as I already said, it drives costs to work with digital technologies because it's very expensive to invest in AI solutions. But on the other hand, we can see that the legal tech market in Sweden is growing, and there are lots of companies today that are offering automated legal services. It could be contracts, templates, and so on, especially on the private side of the legal market. And this is sort of keeping the costs down for the legal service firms. Now, to what extent that will be a more dominating force in the future, we don't know yet, but it is growing, and we need to pay more attention to what's happening there in the developments. Right. Yes, and another thing that I would like to mention about this digitalization as a cost driver is that, again, the strong professional norms here also restricts the demands from the clients. So just as in the case of the PR communication consultants, we can see that many law firms feel that they might want to provide new services to the clients, or that they are sort of ahead of their clients in terms of digital maturity, but that the clients are not really there yet. They're not asking for that kind of services yet. So for instance, I know that some law firms here, they would like to use more e-signatures in their work, but their clients are reluctant to do that. They still want to have paper contracts to work with. Right. So let's move on to the last response. And this is a really exciting one from a research perspective, at least. This is digitalization as a game changer. And this is something we could see very clearly in the auditing industry, because here digitalization is perceived as being very disruptive. And many of the partners said that, well, disruption, it's here, it's happening now, and we just have to deal with it. We can't choose if we want to digitalize or not. I mean, if we don't do it, we're going to be extinct. So it's really a strong strategic focus on digitalization in these firms. And we can see that these firms are engaging in both process innovation and also service innovation. And starting with process innovation, we know that if you work with auditing, a lot of the work has to do with doing analysis of quantitative data. And today we can see that many auditing firms are using different kinds of robots to do that analysis instead, meaning that they can actually analyze the entire data set from the client and not do just random tests, for instance. So that is one way of using new digital technologies to speed up the internal work processes and also make them, as they say, more accurate, because you can take the entire data set into consideration. But we can also see a strong focus on service innovation in these firms. And this has to do again with technology, because now with the use of robotics and so on, and AI, you cannot just do historical analysis of the client's data. We can also do predictive analysis. So what is going to happen in the future with these contracts or these suppliers or whatever it is? And that in turn can be used to make prescriptive analysis. So it's really a change of the temporal focus from looking at what happened historically in the client data towards looking to the future, which is quite exciting. And we can also see that there's a need for new competences and skills in the auditing firms. So for instance, if you have clients who have made large investments in cryptocurrencies, well, then you as an auditor need to know quite a lot about the cryptocurrencies, but also the kind of standards that exist around them to help your clients with the auditing. So for instance, the Swedish tax authority has developed different standards for VAT for different types of cryptocurrencies that you have to keep up with and learn in order to help your clients. And we can also see that what's interesting here is that professional service firms usually build very much on this human-to-human interaction and trust and so on. But now with the increased use of robots in the auditing process, we can see that this human interaction is changing. And now we have robot-to-robot interaction. So the auditing firm's robot is asking the client robot for information, and they are sort of communicating and interacting. And this means that the human-to-human interaction has to change and take a different role, so to say. We're going to come back to that. Right, so a lot of service innovation is happening inside the auditing firms. And if you just click for the next one, please. Yes, sorry, back one. Thank you. And one for. One click. Yes, excellent. Thank you. Yes, so then we can see here that if we go back and look at all the 4 strategies, we can see that in the second strategy, digitalization as a business opportunity, there's a strong focus on this bottom-up innovation, having this service innovation in the client-consultant relationship and interaction. Whereas in the law firms, we can see more of a top-down innovation, as senior management are starting to implement new ways of working, perhaps using AI, perhaps using automation to work in a different way. Whereas in the auditing firms, we have 2 directions at the same time, which is quite a challenge to organize for. So both having the bottom-up innovation and also the top-down innovation. Now, next slide, please. Yes. So having seen these 4 strategic responses, I'm of course a bit curious to know, where do you think that you are in the matrix? Which of the strategies would you say that your organization is using? Very good. So thank you for voting. And we can see that we have a winner. It's digitalization as a business opportunity, which I think is interesting. So then we have, well, the second place we have a game changer. So perhaps you have some auditors in the audience or someone else. I don't know. Very interesting. I think what is important to keep in mind here is not that one of them is better than the other, one of the strategies. It has to do with where your industry is, of course, and what kind of disruption you are facing in your industry. And also thinking back to your own organization. So what is really happening there? What could you do? So if we could have the next slide, please. Sorry, and the next one again. Thank you. So the question is then, okay, so you know where you are, but where would you like to be? Are you in the right place, or would you like to change? Very good. So most you would like to go towards a 4th strategy, to invest more in process and service innovation. I think this is a really, really interesting answer. So then my next question for you is, what is stopping you? And this will be your homework to reflect on. Why is it that you are not using the 4th strategy today? And what would you need to do in order to become more focused on both service and process innovation? Perhaps you don't need to have the threat of disruption, but perhaps you can be more proactive and start taking steps anyway. Great, so thank you so much for sharing. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And next one again. Thank you. Yes, so I would just like to share with you something that we could see across industries, because now I've been speaking about the 4 very different strategic responses. But there were some innovations that we could see across the different types of professional services. And it has to do with the role, the kind of role that the professionals would take in relation to the clients. And the first one is to take on more of a coordinating role. And this meant basically moving away from having this dyadic, a close relationship. I'm a consultant or lawyer or auditor, and this is my client, and we have a trustful relationship. So moving away from that to coordinating bigger projects. And this in turn had to do with that many of the clients were starting to use lots of different agencies. So for instance, within PR communication, a client could be hiring media agencies, advertising agencies, Google Analytics firms, PR communication consulting firms, and so on. And then the firms that we studied said that, well, let us help you. Let us help you to coordinate all these actors, because we know exactly what they can do and how we can bring this together in a nice way. And if there are sort of conflicts between them, we can help you with them. So stepping in as this sort of middleman between the client and the different actors in the ecosystem was a new role that we could see. And this can also be regarded as a way of maintaining this high-end strategic position in the market, not being one of these actors that are being coordinated by, but instead being the coordinator that helps the client. The next one, please. Yes, and the second one that we also could see across the different industries had to do, it's a bit similar, but it had to do with the ecosystems. So one could be that you actually helped your client to define, okay, so what kind of ecosystem are you operating in? Who are the actors here? What is your role in this ecosystem? How can you contribute to it? And so on. But it could also be for a specific project to really, manage, define a specific ecosystem, to manage that ecosystem, again, as a coordinator, and then helping the client to see how can I contribute to this ecosystem and how can they contribute to me and so on. So helping the clients with that, sort of changing the mindset, was also a new role. And then we have the partnering. And one way of dealing with all the new entrants that are entering the market, offering tech-based professional service, is to partner up with them. So instead of out-competing them, just try to partner with them and create a win-win relationship where you as an incumbent firm can help the small startup, but also get help from them with new digital expertise, for instance, or new tools. And then I think we had the last one was to create hubs or in incubators or labs. And we can see this also across the different types of industries, that many firms are starting to experiment with that in different ways. Great. Next slide, please. Right. So this is one of the most important slides, I would say, in this presentation, because we know that if you want to respond to digitalization and disruption, we might need to engage more in digital innovation. But to do that, we need new skills, new competences in-house, people who actually understand digital technologies and how they can be put into use to create more value. So we need more and new competences, but that in turn, this is a key, will have an impact on how your organization is structured and also the culture in the organization. So if you could have the model there, please. We can take everything. Great, thank you. Right, so what we can see here is that many companies are trying to increase their digital expertise by recruiting new people. It could be candidates from engineering schools, but it could also be directly out from college. But to do that, you need to work hard with your employer branding, because you might not have that kind of brand that attracts this new group of people. So for instance, one of the consulting firms I interviewed said that, well, normally we don't have any problems whatsoever to recruit new people, but when it comes to these programmers, they don't know who we are. And what we can offer them is not really attractive to them because they want something else. So we really need to rethink how we work with the employer branding and the talent management activities. And then the largest issue by far for all these other firms has to do with reskilling the existing workforce, because many of the firms have quite a large number of employees who are highly skilled, highly educated, highly trained, have lots of expertise and good relations with clients. You don't want to lose them, but you still need them to become a bit more aware of digital technologies. You don't need to know exactly how it works, but you need to know what can you use blockchain for? What does it mean to work with a bot, for instance, and so on. So engaging in reskilling is really important. And then this links back to how to retain the people. What kind of career paths should we have in the company? Perhaps not everyone wants to become a partner in the pyramid if you have a law firm or auditing firm. Perhaps you need to find other ways of developing your skills. And this in turn, if you start recruit new people, will have more an impact on the structure in the company, of course, but also the culture, because the organizations tend to move away from being mono-professional, having just one group of employees, to having many different groups of employees.
We have a question.
We have a question.
Marcus ANS.
From Marcus ANS. Okay, great.
Can you share any best practice examples of partnerships, hubs, etc., where professional service firms in your study have engaged in order to accelerate digital innovation?
So thank you, Marcus, for the question. So I have promised all the companies anonymity, so I can't tell you any names, but I've seen examples where, for instance, auditing firms have partnered up with tech startups to get access to new types of digital tools or technologies that they need to be able to transfer, to engage in service innovation, basically, to take on a different role together with the clients. So for instance, it could be to deliver not just auditing services, but to help the client change their accounting department. And in doing so, the auditing firm needed, of course, their own expertise in auditing, but also the new technical tools for how to work with the client's accounting systems and so on inside the companies. So that is just one example, but there are many, many more out there. Yes, and I think we need to move on. Yep, I got a sign, 2 minutes left. Okay, great. So we can have the next slide, please. Right. So the last question I would like to ask you is if you think that your organization performance and promotion systems are valuing digital skills, and if you think they are doing it or not. Okay, so we have results here saying that absolutely or to some extent, which I think is quite positive. Yes, because I think most organizations today will need to start to value explicitly digital skills among the workforce. And if you have a promotion system or performance measurement system that helps you do that, that is absolutely fine. If you don't have it, well, perhaps it's time to start thinking about how you could incorporate it in your systems. Okay, thank you for sharing. But could I have the next slide, please? Great, thank you. So I would just like to conclude by saying that digital transformation and innovation is something that we're really focused on here at Stockholm School of Economics, and not least at executive education. So we're having lots of programs that are specifically focused on this. So for instance, we're starting the Accelerating Digital Innovation program now in November, which is an online program. We have also digital transformation, which is more for managers who are up to leading this kind of transformation journey. And then we have leading innovation, which is a program for managers who are interested in innovation. But there are many, many more, of course. And with that, I would just like to conclude and say thank you so much for being part of this webinar. Thank you.